ready?
Yeah.
Yes!
This is the Ross Kaminsky Show.
You're a great American.
He's a great guy.
Now, Ross Kaminsky on Denver's talk station, 630 KHOW.
All right, here we are. Good morning. I'm Ross. It's great to be with you on this Monday morning. Obviously, we got a heck of a lot to talk about today, and I don't want to take any more time. I want to jump right into it here with my very special guest, my friend Andy McCarthy. He is a contributing editor at National Review. He's a former federal prosecutor, all-around good guy and hockey dad, and he's got a piece up this morning at foxnews.com entitled Trump and Impeachment with Days Left in His Term. What should Congress do? We're going to talk about that and a bunch of other things, too. Andy, good morning. Thanks so much for being here.
Ross, great to talk to you.
Before we talk about law and politics in a very specific kind of way, I want to ask you something that borders more on a personal question. For me, I don't think I've ever felt this degree of, a sense of risk to the nation, the fabric of the nation, as I feel now. Even though I'm quite well armed, I feel very, insecure is not the right word. I just feel like things are really unstable in a way that could lead to things that are even worse. I'm not predicting necessarily that they will, but how do you feel?
Well, it's a terrible time. I can't, Ross, say that it's like the worst time I've ever experienced. I remember I was only about 9 years old, but in 1968, in sort of very rapid fire fashion, Martin Luther King was murdered, Bobby Kennedy was murdered. We had unbelievable unrest in the country, and it seemed that from a little bit before then until and through Kent State and the end throes of our involvement in Vietnam, the country just seemed like it was coming off the rails. Mm-hmm. And with Watergate, the same thing. But it didn't come off the rails, and it won't come off the rails now. What we saw last week was shocking. We can't. I don't think we can minimize it in any way. The Capitol hasn't been. I think it was Chris Wallace. I heard say in one of the Fox News broadcasts that during the Vietnam era, there were times when we had 250,000 people demonstrating in the area of the mall. They never breached the Capitol. That's more like what the Brits did in the War of 1812.
Mm-hmm.
So we can't minimize what happened, especially not just with 5 deaths, the killing of a police officer, but those shocking images that we saw over the weekend with the police being beaten. And look, this was not Antifa. This was not Black Lives Matter. This was not, all the current rationalizations that are underway. These were people who regard themselves as hardcore Trump supporters. I don't think it's fair to portray all Trump supporters as if they were the thugs who were ransacking the Capitol and causing all the mayhem that happened. But let's not kid ourselves about who this was, and let's not kid ourselves about what the president's role was in spurring it. I'm not. I've tried to explain to people. I prosecuted a terrorist for inciting violence. There's no way the president could be convicted in a criminal trial of inciting violence. And I'm willing to stipulate that he didn't want to see anybody get hurt or killed. What he was trying to do was utterly inappropriate, but I don't think he wanted what happened to happen, certainly not the way that it did. But as far as his responsibilities under the Constitution and his fitness for an office of high public trust, what happened was atrocious, and he has to be held accountable for it.
So you've written a book about impeachment. You and I spent a lot of time talking about impeachment during the first impeachment of President Trump over his call to Ukraine, which was really more like an impeachment over a laundry list of things that Democrats don't like about Donald Trump. But if anybody learned anything from our conversations, it's that Andy McCarthy's number one rule of impeachment is that it is a political process and a political decision, not a legal process and legal decision. Am I saying that wrong?
No, that's exactly right. And I think, Ross, unlike what we dealt with last year at right around this time, which
God, was that only a year ago? Oh my gosh!
About a year ago. It was just about a year ago that the trial was going on, and that was right before the world ended in February, right? But that is a very interesting contrast to this, because if you remember back then, it was such elusive misconduct that there were ever-shifting theories about criminality of it, because they couldn't figure out a crime that fit, and they couldn't even figure out exactly how to articulate it as a violation of the president's Article 2, duties and responsibilities. So they finally came up with this kind of a catch-all abuse of power thing that went nowhere. Here, I think by contrast, you have the classic textbook case of behavior that would not amount to a prosecutable, indictable violation in criminal court, but which is absolutely an impeachable offense. And I think the easy way for people to understand this is, when we're dealing with a criminal offense, what the state is trying to do is take away your liberty, which is why there's a high degree of proof beyond a reasonable doubt that's required. Whereas when we're dealing with impeachment, we're talking about your fitness for something that's a privilege, not a right. Donald Trump is privileged to be president. He doesn't have a right to be president. So it's not the same high standard to take it away from you, and it doesn't have to be a criminal violation. You simply have to demonstrate that you're not fit for the privilege.
And you pointed out last time that you can impeach someone for something that's not a crime, but it's much more difficult, right? In the sense that it's a political process. If you're going to remove someone from office for something that isn't a crime, it better be serious enough and obvious enough that the public will understand why you're doing it. And I think it's much more the case now. One quick tangent, Andy, and then we'll get back to all this stuff. Did you think that there is an argument to be made that the call that President Trump made to the Georgia Secretary of State was impeachable conduct?
Yes. Now, if I were in Congress drawing up articles of impeachment, and particularly if I had time, now we're talking about, the president's got about, 9 days to go now. So if they're going to impeach him, they need to make it as thin and compelling as they can. But if there was more time and I was crafting for Congress, like they did with Nixon, an impeachment case, I would add that as an article of impeachment, but I don't think I would ever have done it as a standalone. I think it was bad misconduct. And if somebody asked me if it were impeachable, as you just did, I'd say yes, it was impeachable. But impeachment's political, as we've said, and I don't know if you would have gotten the support that would get 2/3 of the Senate to vote a president out over that. Whereas I think this thing at the Capitol, you shouldn't have a whole lot of trouble getting 2/3 of the Senate to vote on that.
So I think it's pretty clear that if President Trump did what he just did a year ago, notwithstanding the fact that this stuff was all in reaction to the election, so it couldn't have been a year ago, but hypothetically, if this were a year earlier, this is an impeachment that would happen, should happen, and would probably succeed. But it's not a year ago. As you just pointed out, there are 9 days left until Joe Biden takes office, and the Senate is in recess until the day before Joe Biden takes office. So how do we think about the possibility of impeachment logistically?
Well, it would be a lot easier, Ross, if for all their caterwauling about what a great crisis we're in, the House Democrats had actually acted like it was a crisis. Instead they went home, and Pelosi last night unburdened herself to write a stern letter to Pence, saying you better get with the program and invoke the 25th Amendment, or else we're going to impeach. In the meantime, a week has gone by. If you're taking the position that we can't abide another second of the Trump presidency because of the profound danger to national security, then you have to act like that's true. You don't go home for a week. So, I think they're going to have trouble pulling that together in the amount of time that they have. They couldn't possibly at this point impeach him till Wednesday. And there would be a lot of problems that people would have with that, I think. I think most people think this is an impeachable offense, and he should be impeached. But, there are supposed to be some standards and guidelines and all that stuff. And I think you could put those due process considerations to the side, or at least strip them down and marginalize them, if you have a real crisis and you're actually authentically taking the position that we can't have this guy in office for one more second. But you can't take a week off and then tell everyone it's too urgent to have any due process. So I think they're going to have a little problem with their credibility about this. But the point is they can't really get it done till Wednesday, Thursday, Friday this week at the earliest. And then at that point, you have to ask yourself, what's the point?
Mm-hmm.
Because, as much as I believe that a president can be impeached after he's out of office already. I've looked at this pretty carefully. The framers had a contemporary example when they were drafting the impeachment clause. Besides all of the historical experience that the colonies had with impeachment, they also had the impeachment in Parliament of Warren Hastings by Edmund Burke, leading the charge in Parliament. And that was at a time when Hastings was out of office, but they impeached him anyway. So, and also the fact that the penalty for impeachment is not just removal from office, it's disqualification from future office. So you can at least make an argument that there's a reason to do it even after the person is out. But
and just as a technical, sorry, just quick thing, just as a technical legal point, the disqualification from holding further office is a separate vote. It's not automatic with impeachment, but it requires a smaller number of votes. It's a simple majority after conviction. So if you get conviction, you would think it would be near automatic that they would ban him from holding future office.
I would think so. First of all, though, Russ, as a practical matter,
he's already not a viable candidate, I think. But
yeah, if anyone consider returning this guy to office after what's happened, it's
a lot of people would, though, Andy.
Problems.
You know that a lot of people would. You see them all over your Twitter feed, or at least you did before Twitter did what they just did.
Yeah, but there's a difference, Ross, between how he got to office the first time and now, and there's a difference between saying the president should remain in office versus if Donald Trump is out of office, trying to get him the nomination and elected again. I don't think there's any way that could. But look, going by what you pointed out at the beginning of our discussion about how unstable and uncertain everything feels now, it's foolish for me to say never about anything, but I just don't see that. But in any event, you're right. It would be a separate vote. We've never had a presidential impeachment trial that went beyond the verdict stage. But I think it would be three separate votes. It would be the vote on conviction, the vote on removal, and the vote on disqualification. And you're quite right. Removal is 2/3, and disqualification is a simple majority.
So, as sort of technical matter, and I vaguely remember this from last time, when the House votes to impeach, that is not the same as automatically delivering the impeachment to the Senate to force the Senate to start their process, right? So we had Jim Clyburn this weekend saying, well, we might vote to impeach this week, but then Nancy Pelosi will decide if and when she wants to appoint managers and send it to the Senate. And maybe we'll wait until Joe Biden's gotten through his first 100 days so we don't distract him. And of course, that would raise so many more questions about, why are you really doing this? But is that, my question for you, Andy, is that right that if they vote this week to impeach, that in itself does not automatically start the process in the Senate?
That's correct. She has to appoint managers and transmit the articles of impeachment to the Senate. That's not self-actuating. They actually have to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And as I was starting to say, and I just got myself sidetracked, even though I think that he could be impeached after he's out of office, there's a very strong legal argument that he can't. That the point is moot once he's been removed. And to the extent that you're worried about disqualification, you can always deal with that if he ever tries to seek office again. But as long as he's been impeached, as long as he's left office, there's no point in tying up the business of the country to remove him from office. And under the Senate rules, if it's a presidential impeachment, and even though Trump wouldn't be in office anymore, it would still be a presidential impeachment in the sense that that's what he's being impeached for. His failure of carrying out his constitutional duties as president. The work of the country shuts down, essentially, when there's a presidential impeachment. So, if there's any point in doing this, then you have to do it. You have to do it quickly because the way the law regards it, there's nothing more important than a presidential impeachment. So if they're going to haul off and do this, then you shut everything down until you get it done.
Yeah.
And for that reason, I just don't see the point of it when you're dealing with a president who's going to be out in 9 days. Although, Ross, there's a hole in our law, and we're going to have to think about this in terms of how you deal with it. If you have a president who's been stricken by a profound medical issue of some kind, like the Woodrow Wilson having a stroke in 1918, say, we have a way to deal with that. We have the 25th Amendment. You can invoke that, and then the second it's invoked, the vice president is acting president. We don't have that for misconduct. The remedy in our Constitution for misconduct by a president is impeachment. And Rich Lowry and I talked about this in my National Review podcast last week. My hypothetical is, what if you wake up one morning and you find out the president's a Russian spy? You have slam dunk, undeniable evidence that he's a Russian spy. So it's not that he's non compos mentis; it's quite the opposite, right? He's a sinister spy. Do you wait for Congress to get around, even if they could impeach him, really quickly? If you had that situation, you really would be in a shape where you couldn't have the president be president for one more minute. You'd need to get him out of there. We really don't have a way to do that.
Does the 25th Amendment include non compos mentis as well right now, or is it really more about physical inability?
Well, it's physical, and if you had a profound psychological problem such that you couldn't function as president, that would count also. So I always say medical because to me, that takes in both the physical and the psychological, but it's not supposed to be a proxy or a substitute for impeachment. So if you're talking about high crimes and misdemeanors, impeachment is the way the Constitution says that needs to work. Now, we've over the years added all this due process to the investigation phase and the trial phase of impeachment, but as Justice Jackson said famously, the Constitution's not a suicide pact. And the most important thing is always the national security of the United States. So it can't be that if you had a president who you knew was a Russian spy, you wouldn't be able to impeach him right away because that would violate his due process rights, right? You'd have to get him out of office.
Yeah.
So I think we really have to deal with that.
We've got about a minute left, Andy, and let's just spend a minute here on some of the political aspects of this. I'll give you a thesis, and then you tell me what you think of it. So I think that the Democrats in the House will vote to impeach, and I think Nancy Pelosi will never send it to the Senate. And I think that if she did send it to the Senate, I think it hurts the Democrats in at least three ways. Number one is it makes them look like they're wasting the country's time because Trump will be out of office already. Number two, if it's possible to make Trump supporters any more upset or any more motivated to vote against Democrats than they already are, that would do it. And number three, it has the potential to actually stabilize the Republican Party by removing the possibility, although it's probably already remote, of President Trump trying to get the nomination in 2024. If he's definitely out of the way, it sure cleans things up a lot for the Republican Party. So if I were the Republican Party, I'd almost want them to send it to the Senate. What's your take?
Yeah, I agree with most of that. The one place where I go sideways with you is I don't think Pelosi will do it without intending to send it to the Senate. And I think the way, and obviously they don't want to grind the Senate to a halt when, Biden doesn't even have a cabinet yet. He doesn't want to wait till March to form his government. But I think what will happen probably is Schumer will say that even though it's a presidential impeachment in the sense that this is violations in the presidency, he's no longer president, so we don't have to follow the usual rules for presidential impeachment, and we'll give it to a committee, which is how they deal with most other impeachments besides presidential impeachments. And there'll be an impeachment investigation and trial in the Senate, and there'll be an ultimate vote on it, but it won't shut the work of the Senate down.
Wow, interesting. Andy McCarthy's new piece up at foxnews.com right now, Trump and impeachment. With days left in his term, what should Congress do? Andy McCarthy, contributing editor, National Review, former federal prosecutor, and one of my very favorite people. Thanks so much for being here, Andy.
Thanks, Ross. My pleasure.
Wow. All right. I hope you learned some things there. I know I did. I always learn some things from Andy. When we come back, we got to talk about what's happening to not just President Trump, but so many conservatives online and on social media right now.